Um, so my name is Dave Pagel. I am a founding member of the Duluth Climbers Coalition, which is part of the Duluth Area Outdoor Alliance. You can't tell with the mask on, but if any of you have ever been to the Duluth 101 presentations here, I'm also the host of that. This is not part of the Duluth 101 series, technically, but it would fit right in, actually. So, that series is all about amazing aspects of our city, and our public lands dovetails right into that whole idea. So, think of this as a extra special tacked on version of this at the end of our Duluth 101 spring season. I'll let my co-host here introduce himself.
Yeah, my name is Ansel Schimpff. I am the executive director of COGS, or the Cyclistic Gitchagumi Shores. And through that, have been kind of pulled into this broader public lands conversation. We are also, as Dave mentioned, part of the Duluth Area Outdoor Alliance. The Duluth Area Outdoor Alliance was founded in 2010 by local individuals and organizations. And they all came together to explore how the outdoor recreation community could better represent the region's recreational opportunities. And the first major outcome of those meetings was the creation of the Duluth Outdoor Recreation Map, which is still printed by the city of Duluth today. Oh boy. The DAOA began meeting more regularly and eventually became this alliance focused on helping the city of Duluth envision, plan, and build public support for the St. Louis River Corridor Initiative in 2016. And through the efforts of DAOA member organizations and the city, there was a referendum passed to allocate $18 million to recreation projects outlined in that initiative. And funds were required to be matched dollar for dollar for that project, resulting in about $36 million of investment along the St. Louis River Corridor. So all of these groups have been kind of working together on this organization and on different initiatives over the years. But why we're here today, the Lester Golf Course conversation that Judy was just talking about left a lot of people in the community feeling kind of frustrated. The city council voted to waive their 8 out of 9 majority vote that is required before you can sell city parkland, and they did that before completing a land use study and before knowing what any proposed development would look like. And the whole process kind of just lacked transparency, and the community was really feeling shut out. And then further frustration from that stems from the quid pro quo nature of this transaction, where they tied the protection of 1,500 acres of public land to the transfer of the golf course to DEDA, which is two separate things. And that transaction raised a lot of questions about the protected status of other public lands in Duluth. And so tonight's goal is to distill this complicated public lands map that we have in Duluth, explain where we are, how we got here, and what we can do to make sure that Duluth remains a model of public land access and outdoor recreation.
Are you all done?
No, go for it, yeah.
I was just going to say, just one more thing I want to say as part of the pre-ramble here, is that I want to make the point that the DAOA is not an anti-development organization, nor is this an anti-development presentation. Duluth needs housing, in particular affordable housing. That's something we all understand. Pursuing that goal is important as long as it follows set city procedures and policies. And that's what Ansel was kind of getting at, was this whole transfer that happened last fall or the end of last year didn't really line up with a lot of the ways that things have happened in the past in terms of public land. The land we'll be talking about tonight has been specifically prioritized for recreation or conservation by the city. And here it is. There are two types of public land in Duluth, state-owned and city-owned, and we'll get into the details of that as we talk here. To present a clearer picture, we've removed the airport, UMD, government facility properties, freeway, boulevards, all that kind of stuff from this map. And what we're left with is about 10,000 acres. That said, is any of this public land reasonable to consider for development? Maybe a little. I know there are some groups within the Outdoor Alliance thinking long and hard about this. I'm looking at you, Isaac Walton League here. But in general, the answer is no. Because again, this land is mostly property the city, in conjunction with groups like the Minnesota Land Trust, has identified as important to remain as open spaces. There's other public land in Duluth that they've identified as perhaps appropriate for development. What we're talking about tonight is the land that the city has identified as important to leave as open spaces for all the reasons that we'll outline tonight. I'm already using terms like in general and mostly, and you see that little tilde thing before the 10,000 lands there. That's because this is a very complex, layered topic. So that approximately sign, Ansel and I should probably be wearing t-shirts with that mounted on it. A lot of the numbers and information we present tonight may not line up precisely with what you may have heard from other sources. You know, we're saying 10,000 acres. Some sources cite it as, 8,500, some 11,000 acres. So we don't want people to get too bogged down in numbers, or if things don't match what you have in your head that you've heard from other sources, don't get too fixated on that. A couple reasons for this is that these things are in a constant state of flux, especially the state-owned land is constantly being brought in as tax forfeited property and auctioned off because that's what the state does with public land. So that's one of the reasons, is that things are in flux and changing a lot. Our maps and info that we're going to show you tonight are snapshots of the present moment as best we can determine. Things are going to change maybe next week, maybe they changed last week, but the present moment. And frankly, the other reason that this is all kind of loosey-goosey is that nobody knows for sure. The city themselves often have no idea the status of public land. And that's because this whole thing dates back a century or more, when everything was sort of printed and, lost in drawers, and they have to do extensive searches to kind of figure it all out. Ansel's going to talk a little bit more about that at some point here. But that's the other thing, is that a lot of this nobody knows for sure without a lot of research. So it's important to not get too hung up on numbers. Our goal tonight, like Ansel said, is to give you a basic understanding about Duluth's public lands, what they are, what protections they have or don't have, and what we can advocate for to improve things. We don't want to muddy the water by diving too deeply or wading into exceptions. That's a sure way to sow complexity and reap confusion. And before I mix more metaphors, I think it's probably the time for us to get started here. I'm going to start out talking about the history of public land in Duluth, how we got to where we are today. And in this context, public land, open spaces, green spaces, they're all synonymous for this conversation. And Duluth is a green belt city. This idea of a green belt is key. It speaks to the interconnectedness of our public lands, which has value for a number of different reasons. One of these is access, which has been a part of the city's vision since the very beginning. Even in the 19th century, citizens and city planners recognized the value of neighborhoods adjoining unspoiled land, open spaces where residents could relax, recreate, and reconnect with nature, the 3 R's of public lands, I call them. During the Industrial Revolution, it was a concept fully realized in Manhattan's Central Park, where the primacy of steel and concrete was checked by a visceral human need for undeveloped and restorative open places. I know that this looks like a bunch of upper crust fancy people frolicking in coiffed acreage, but the concept of public parks and preserved open spaces are by nature egalitarian. They're independent of economic status of circumstances, available to all. What green spaces bring to a city, what it offers citizens, those three R's, those benefits extend to everybody. In Duluth, where Lake Superior, the St. Louis River, and a rocky escarpment dictated a narrow city comprised of end-to-end neighborhoods, a green belt existed naturally and fulfilled those needs. In fact, geology and geography limited development. Thin or non-existent soil on the hillside, 800 feet of rocky elevations, commerce concentrated on the lake, meant that development pressure within this belt was minimal. It was, at least compared to all the gritty industry taking place along the shoreline, our Eden. Within this corridor, expansive views, forested hillsides, creeks and cascades provided Duluthians access to restorative natural spaces, regardless of where they lived in Duluth or their social class. East, west, central, didn't matter in Duluth. There was a park or undeveloped Walden-like land close by. More fancy people. These carriage rides, also known as tally-ho parties, were one way to take in the sights in Duluth. The completion of Skyline Parkway, championed by interwar Mayor Sam Snively, was an early successful effort by a Duluth administration to create a formal cross-city park-like amenity. Again, despite the obvious privilege on display here, this boulevard traversed immigrant neighborhoods and mansion districts. You didn't need a fancy carriage to enjoy Skyline. But since that time, due to shifting political and economic priorities, Duluth's Greenbelt has fragmented. And like Skyline Parkway itself, today, our public lands exist within parks and other preserves. Some have been subsumed by development, and some, despite nature having free rein there, exist in uncertain limbo. Let's consider the city-owned portions of our public land in Duluth first. City parks have been platted on Duluth maps since at least 1874. But again, it was Sam Snively, building upon previous efforts, who applied significant resources to protecting a broader swath of green space. He envisioned parks surrounding all the major streams coming down the Duluth hillsides, and everything connected by park-like boulevards. And with the completion of Skyline, he pretty much achieved that. He had a lot of time to do it. Remember, I mentioned that he was our interwar mayor. Well, that's 20 years. How long was he mayor? Well, pretty dang near all of that. Sam Snively holds the record for the most consecutive terms of a Duluth mayor. He's our FDR, 4 terms, 4 consecutive terms. So really, almost that entire interwar period, he was mayor of Duluth. And this idea of public lands and access to it and broadening it and interconnecting it, that was one of his babies. This is Fairmount Park, where the zoo is today, and one of Snively's personal favorites. Despite living at the top of Seven Bridges Road, he frequented this park in the western part of the city. He held an annual picnic for orphans here every year. If you love the outdoors, there's a lot to like about Sam Snively, including the fact that his middle name is Frisbee. But he's also the source of a quote that, to my mind, perfectly sums up the essence of Duluth. Snively wasn't a native to Duluth. He came here from out east as a young man, to make his fortune, and it wasn't easy. But this was his quote. Sometimes when I become discouraged, I say to myself, I don't have my glasses on. Ansel, read that for me.
I should have gone to another city to seek my fortune, but then I look over these hills and see the natural beauty of our community. I console myself and wonder, where in all the wide world could I find a view like this?
Yeah, if that doesn't sum up the essence of Duluth, I don't know what does. Subsequent administrations have built upon Snively's holistic vision, adding a diversity of other parks, natural areas, and recreational amenities, including, significantly, trails. Now let's turn to Duluth's state-owned public land, which had a very different origin. one rooted in expansive industrial growth. In the decades surrounding the turn of the last century, the city underwent explosive economic boom. The population nearly doubled in just 20 years. The underpinning for all this industry was land. Land for mills, foundries, and shipyards sited elbow to elbow along the waterfront of the harbor and the estuary. Land for the quarry in West Duluth, where daily dynamite explosions shattered windows and rained rocky debris on homes and heads in the adjoining neighborhoods. Land for railroads, elevators, and docks for the speedy conveyance of iron ore, timber, and grain. But as the century progressed, things reversed. The Great Depression and the collapse of the steel industry heralded a sharp downturn in Duluth's economic fortunes. The population crashed, tax delinquency was pervasive, and when you don't pay your property taxes, it isn't the city that takes your land, it's the state of Minnesota. And during this time, the state was overwhelmed with foreclosures. So in 1935, legislation was passed that gave counties management authority over tax forfeited land, which is why we often call it today county tax forfeit land. But it is in fact owned by the state, managed by the county. When the smoke cleared, literally, a lot of former city and private land had been converted to county-managed state land, our second type of public land found within the city of Duluth. Today, however, Duluth is in the midst of another boom as a premier destination for outdoor recreation, and that's where those trails I mentioned earlier really come in. Much of the state land where many trails are located has rewilded and been cleaned up. Today, the estuary is fronted by a national water trail. The quarry features hiking, biking, and ice climbing, and the Superior Hiking Trail and the Duluth Traverse are cross-city amenities for the 21st century. Meanwhile, our expansive system of city parks and natural areas has grown to over 160 and counting. So here's the current picture. The Greenbelt is fragmented, but looking pretty good. For the most part, the SHT, Superior Hiking Trail, and DT, Duluth Traverse, provide greener corridors of interconnectedness than even Sam Snively could have envisioned. Cities across the country would kill to have what we have. Many are in the process of trying to claw back public land that was either ceded or sold for development. And from our enviable position with all this public land, it's easy for us to take this for granted. A park will always stay a park because it's protected, right? How secure is our current situation? Well, let's look at this land here through the lens of protections afforded to it. So this is all of our public land. This is the public land that has some degree of protection. So it can't just arbitrarily be sold without public action. But it isn't that high a bar for that kind of stuff to happen. In terms of elevated protection, where it's quite difficult to get rid of it without public process, our Greenbelt is looking pretty anemic. And there's some strange things going on. Look at Lester Park up here. You'll see part of what's inside the park is not green. So that idea of once it's a park, it's always a park, isn't necessarily true, even right now in one of our most popular parks. And Ansel will talk a little bit more about that. I'll let Ansel pick it up here to talk about the definitions and protections afforded to Duluth's public lands. Oh yeah, go ahead. I need to put my glasses on. So that, according to the people who put these maps together for us, that green stuff on Park Point there is land that has a degree of protection, but not the highest level of protection. In other words, that land is probably Zone P1. And we'll get into that for those of you who don't know what that is. So that's our understanding when we made the maps. They looked at all the zoning, all the different things, and then, whoops, Again, elevated protection there, which would require, well, Ansel will tell you all about that.
There is one thing to note that, so this is the main park where there's the beach and then this is the airport, but there's a house in here right when you cross into that, and that was a situation where somebody at the city didn't check the deed of a piece of property that they sold, and now somebody has an incredible house inside of a designated park. So just sort of part of why this is such an important discussion. But some of the definitions of our public land. So the two ways it breaks out, as Dave was saying, was city-owned, which is about 6,500 acres, and then state-owned, which is tax forfeit managed by the county, and that's about 3,500 acres within the city. And then below that, of that city-owned land, we have areas that are parks and natural areas, and then unrestricted administrative land. And then below the parks and natural areas, we have our natural area protection areas. We have dedicated parkland, and then we have areas that is zoned as parkland. So that's P1 if you're looking at a big zoning map.
And before you move on, Ansel, I just want to draw your attention to this as well. The colors here also sort of designate the level of protection that Ansel will get into here. So keep this slide in mind. And the red means virtually no protections. That stuff could be sold tomorrow, both county and city land that fall under those two things. And then as we go down, we get more and more and more protection. The DNAP and the dedicated park have the highest. So the colors are important too in that map.
All right, so within that city land, we have our natural areas, or our Duluth Natural Areas program. And we have our parks formally dedicated or zoned, and that includes our DNAP areas. And then we have that unrestricted administrative land, which is everything else. And the DNAP is an area that the city is committed to preserving in perpetuity. And these are public lands that are determined in accordance with a select criteria. And that includes high-quality plant and animal communities, habitat for special species, natural water features, important bird habitat, and other geologic landforms. So those are areas that the city identifies and puts under this highest level of park protection. And the designated natural areas add about 3,600 acres. And like I said, those represent high-quality native plant and animal communities, habitat for these special species, and the city is committed to protecting these areas. So there currently are 3 designated natural area programs or areas that are protected in Duluth, and that includes Magny-Snively, which is the big green area. I don't have my pointer. Yeah, that's Magny-Snively, Hartley Nature Center, and then the St. Louis River Corridor. An additional 3,000 acres of city-owned land are managed as public open space. So this includes developed parks like our playgrounds and ball fields and hockey rinks, and then all of the open space that we all think of as parkland. And then within those parks, we have areas that are formally dedicated as parks. And as far as I can tell, that just means that it's a legal designation, and that is tied to the individual title of each parcel of within those boundaries. And then the rest, so this land is zoned as P1 or zoned as a park, but it doesn't have that further level of title protection. And so these are some of the different levels of protection of this area. So, and these all refer to how many votes from city council you would need to change that land from park and then sell it for private development. So, Natural Areas Protection Program requires an 8 out of 9 supermajority. Land that is formally dedicated as parkland or deed restricted also requires that 8/9 vote. Land that is just zoned as P1, so zoned as park, but no formal dedication, has just a simple majority. And then unrestricted administrative land, there's no vote required to sell that land off. It can be done by somebody in the planning district or office in the city. And a lot of our trail corridors actually cross this unrestricted, protected, or unprotected land. And then we have everything else, which is the county tax forfeit, county managed land. And so state land outside of the city is managed by the county for mining or timber production or hunting. But within the city limits, we don't have the ability to have large-scale mining operations or timber harvest. And so that land can really be used for one of two things. It can be transferred to the city, and the city then can either sell it for private development, or they can keep it as parkland for recreation or conservation. Some of our most popular trail networks in areas that we think of as park are actually county-managed state land. So like David mentioned earlier, most of Lester Park, where all of the ski trails are, is actually tax forfeit county-managed land. Piedmont and Brewer Parks, and then some of Mission, also are not actually city parks, even though they've been used as city park.
One thing I'll just jump in and add to is that the county doesn't need to sell it to the city before it can go to a developer. The county could actually sell it, or I'm sorry, the county could actually sell that land straight to a developer or straight to a private person at county auction. They're mandated by the state to sell that land if they can't use it for mining and the other things that Ansel was talking about. So that land, that county land, is extremely vulnerable.
And then this is just a couple of snapshots from the city's zoning map. So this shows that Lester Park, most of what we think of as Lester Park, is actually zoned as rural residential, which means that you can build traditional housing on 5-acre lots. And then on the other side, we have much of Piedmont and Brewer Park. But then in the top corner, that's actually Enger Park, Enger Golf Course, is all zoned as R1, or just traditional residential land. But there is a lot of nuance with that. So we have, over the last 15 years, have built out the Superior Hiking Trail and the Duluth Traverse Spine. And a lot of the Duluth Traverse Spine specifically is built with state grants. And those grants guarantee that that trail corridor will be protected for a minimum of 20 years. And then other parcels have been acquired through conservation funds for the city, and so those are required to be preserved. And then there's land that the county has transferred to the city at no cost or partial value, and that must be used for the intended use. So there's been a really good relationship between the city and the county, and they've looked at areas where people have been building trails and using them for recreation, and they've said, okay, we will transfer you this land, but it has to stay in use for that kind of existing use that the community already has there. But like Dave was mentioning earlier, record keeping has been really inconsistent. And so there's a lot of land that maybe was dedicated as park or was maybe transferred as park, but that designation wasn't really noted in those sales. And so it just takes a lot of digging to go back through different meeting notes to find out what actually is protected.
All right, I will pick it up here again. As I mentioned earlier, one of the things that has gotten people so worked up about the Lester Park golf course transfer is that it seems to run contrary to established city thinking and policy. As I alluded to earlier, thanks to the omnipresent lake and estuary and world-class destination worthy infrastructure like the SHT and the DT, outdoor recreation on public land has become integrated into Duluth's identity. The Superior Hiking Trail is this unbelievable resource that goes, from south of here all the way to the Canadian border and crosses completely through our city And on most of it, you'd never know you're in a city. Same thing with the Duluth Traverse. The Duluth Traverse multi-use trail is this incredible mountain biking asset, which has ended up being the core of Duluth getting this gold level ride status from, or gold level city status from the International Mountain Biking Organization. There's only 6 in the world, gold level. You know, there's Canada doesn't have one, Europe doesn't have one, and one of them is Duluth. So an incredible amenity because of that cross-city corridor that Ansel helps manage. And because of those 2 things and the other things kind of going on in the city, Outside Magazine picked us, in 2015 as our like the best outdoor town in Duluth or in the country. And this all happened as the really big wave of outdoor projects were just getting going. Ansel was talking earlier about this broad initiative by the Ness administration to redirect a tourism tax to fund 24 outdoor recreation projects in western Duluth. This was the St. Louis River Corridor Initiative. And this really kicked things up in Duluth in terms of it being an outdoor recreation hub and destination. The goals of this whole initiative were to promote tourism, improve quality of life for people who live here, increase property values for neighborhoods and housing adjacent to some of these amenities, and just throughout the city in general. By bolstering and increasing the diversity of Duluth's world-class outdoor opportunities, the River Corridor Initiative has been wildly successful in solidifying Duluth's place as a top-tier city for outdoor recreation and adventure, which is a highly marketable niche for attracting tourists, for attracting new residents, for attracting new businesses. As a climber, my favorite example of this is when the Super Bowl was in the Twin Cities a couple of years ago. Visit Duluth, which is the city's marketing arm, needed one image. Their whole budget for marketing Duluth during the Super Bowl, they were going to wrap a train with an image. And they needed one image to represent our city to folks coming in from all over the world. And they didn't pick the Lift Bridge or Inger Tower or Park Point or any of the sort of traditional stuff for marketing Duluth. They picked an ice climber at Quarry Park. So again, a very enviable and marketable niche in the present day. So this is reflected not only in city marketing, but in planning and policy. Periodically over the last 100 years, forward-thinking Duluth administrations have applied a great deal of effort and resources into formally assessing the city's needs, resources, and ambitions. These are known as comprehensive plans. They are guides for municipal decision-making and future planning that envision and work toward creating the best possible future for our city. The very first one was spearheaded in the 1920s by, you guessed it, Samuel Frisbee Snively. There haven't been a lot of those since then, but there were 2 major efforts in this century. In 2006, during the Bergson administration, and a very in-depth study in 2018 by the Larson administration, as well as a Trails Assessment Report in 2013 when Don Ness was mayor. All of these studies took a long look at public land, and in every cases, each of these studies recognized the value of Duluth parks, trails, and undeveloped open spaces in an idealized future. They established policies related to preserving public lands, defined sensible, thoughtfully developed processes for administering and protecting open spaces, and affirmed the importance of public engagement and citizen input. The city affirms the necessity and value of Duluth's Greenbelt. This is what I find really fascinating. From the 2006 Comprehensive Plan, open spaces, natural areas, and recreational areas are more valuable if interconnected. The city will strive to connect its green space and recreational areas through natural corridors on public or private land trail systems and creations of boulevard corridors on public right-of-ways. There it is, the Greenbelt as city policy. At the same time, the city recognized that many of our outdoor recreation amenities on state land are not secure. From the 2018 Comprehensive Plan, Some of Duluth's tax forfeit lands contain public trails, and the community uses these resources quite extensively. To protect this investment, ownership of these resources needs to be fully delineated. And from the recreational trails assessment, Duluth's legacy of mixed ownership has resulted in a complex and informal system in which important trail connections could be inadvertently lost. And the bottom line there, and what they're talking about, is that tax forfeited land does not align with the city's vision for open spaces. So from this, two priorities emerge. First, a realignment. Transfer the approximately 3,500 acres of tax forfeited land to the city, while at the same time, and this is key, apply meaningful protections to city-owned open spaces. Finally, an example of how critical this issue is. So this is a real estate offering that was recently listed on Zillow and other sites, 7 acres in Duluth, right in the heart of the Greenbelt. It's important to note that this is not state land, this is private land up for sale. I don't know the history of this particular property, but one way land like this becomes private is by county auction. So I include it here as an example of the potential vulnerability of tax forfeit land in Duluth. Arguably a bargain, this prime real estate, for that price, that much of it. Especially if a person sold a modest house in Salt Lake or Portland or Denver. This is very attractive, especially if they are outdoor people. Check this out. So this is, in the offering, the sellers play up the fact that the Duluth Traverse runs right through the property. So here's the property, and here's the DT going right through the center of it. Ansel talked about how the corridor is protected. You can see that the corridor is not very wide. Another important thing to glean from this example, the old barriers to development within the Greenbelt, geography, geology, they no longer apply. Modern construction methods means that 10 feet of fill can be brought in just about everywhere, and so now everybody wants to live on the hill. What's the number one selling point listed for a home in Duluth if it has one? A lake view. And there's nothing wrong with that. But straddling the DT, pretty much everyone who hikes or bikes or walks a dog or watches birds on public trails will argue that the experience isn't the trail, it's the surroundings. The DAOA would argue that there is a place for that house on the hill, but perhaps not right on top of one of our most beloved, heavily used, and marketable outdoor attractions, which by its very nature depends upon undeveloped open spaces surrounding it to remain so. And there's a lot of trail-adjacent tax forfeit land in Duluth just like this. So what can we do to advocate for and protect our public land and amenities? Ansel will lead us through it. That's not an endorsement of Ansel for mayor, but I've heard of worse ideas.
And I want to share one other story about this particular property. I think it was last fall. We had a conference, an outdoor conference here in Duluth, and Alan Sparhawk of the band Low tells this story about how our outdoors and our trails have been so important in his personal mental health as he's struggled with the loss of his wife and bandmate and partner. And this corner right here is a spot that he would come and look out over the lake. You can see the entire North Shore from there. And so that feeling is totally just goes away if all of a sudden somebody puts a condo or a big house right on the edge of that trail corridor. I also built that corner of trail. I built a lot of that trail, and so I remember sitting in my excavator looking out over this incredible view of the city and just thinking about what an amazing space we actually have here. So that's just a story about that particular piece of trail. So what is kind of happening now? So the city has been working on a project called the Strategic Public Lands Realignment Project, and as David mentioned, tax forfeit land is not part of the strategic plan for the city. So the city acquired about 2,000 acres, or roughly 700 parcels, individual parcels of tax forfeited land from St. Louis County. And it's a multi-year project that was funded in part by the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative grant from the EPA. And many of these newly acquired parcels are already in active public use. As tax forfeit property, these parcels could have been sold at any time, but under city ownership, they will be preserved for recreation and designated as parks or natural areas and protected for future generations. The project involves city staff, and it's been just an incredible story of collaboration between our city staff and our partners at the EPA and the Minnesota Land Trust. And also from within the city, departments like stormwater, properties, and parks and recreation have all been a part of these conversations to identify land that should be preserved for one reason or the other. And there's a lot of progress happening. So there's a new DNAP area that is being worked on right now. And this will protect a lot of that area that's in Lester Park that I was showing you earlier. So up along Amity Creek and Hawk Ridge, and that provides the highest level of protection available. And then, as we were mentioning earlier, there's 1,500 acres of tax forfeit land that will be brought into some level of protection as part of the transfer of Lester Golf Course to DEDA. And then the other big thing that's happening is it's really kind of brought this issue to the forefront, and there's a lot of conversation happening right now within the community. So there's a lot of people that are now realizing that maybe their favorite park or their favorite trail wasn't as protected as they thought it was. So the areas in yellow on this map are all areas that are being brought into some level of protection through that strategic lands realignment. But there's a need to look at what other public land is out there that maybe should have a higher level of protection. And there's also something that's come up with in a lot of these conversations is that there's a need for a different land designation. So right now we have park and we have administrative land, but when everything is put into this park bucket, it's really easy to then tie the deficit, our budget deficit within our parks department and deferred maintenance on park amenities like bathrooms and buildings and all these built assets. It's easy to tie that to the fact that we have a lot of public land that is undeveloped. And those two things are fundamentally unrelated. And we've had elected officials trying to tie our wealth of public lands to our budget deficits. And that's just an inaccurate representation of the reality with our city's budget. And then there are some priority areas that we should look at going forward. So this is, let's see, this is the Downer Park area. So if you're not familiar, this is in Upper Woodland. And the blue area was recently acquired from, there's two cemeteries there. This one was acquired from the Park Hill Cemetery in blue. And that is a key corridor for the Duluth Traverse. And then the area in brown or red is the Forest Hill property. And the city secured a grant to acquire that property from Forest Hill back in 2024, but to this date, that hasn't gone through, and it seems like they are going to allow that grant to expire. And it's been really hard to get a good reason for why that's happening. I've heard that they are looking at other ways of acquiring that land, but there seems to be a desire within the current administration to take a closer look at some of these areas that were already. Yeah, you want to go ahead? So it sounds like, yeah, like I was saying, there is effort to make that happen, and hopefully it does. It's the last segment that we need to complete the Duluth Traverse Spine, and it's also a really important segment for the Superior Hiking Trail that goes through the city. But we had this presentation last month, and a lot of people want to know, what can I do? Well, number one, getting informed. You guys are all here. That's the first step, is just to know a little bit more about this land, and that's huge. I think having more people understand the status of all of our parkland and our green space is going to be the biggest part. Speaking up, contact your city council. Let elected officials know that protecting our public lands matters, and support conversations around zoning designations that would protect trail corridors and green spaces permanently. And then get involved. Watch for proposals to sell or rezone or transfer public land. And then I think the other part that we have to do is, like Dave was saying, this isn't an anti-housing or anti-development conversation or group. So getting involved in conversations around housing and development. Those conversations are intrinsically linked to our public lands and conservation efforts, but they're not inherently in opposition. We should be encouraging our elected officials and city staff to follow the existing comprehensive plan, while pursuing substantive changes necessary to address housing shortages in ways that actually benefit our communities. And then finally, support local advocacy organizations. So groups like the DIOA and groups like COGS have been stewards of this land as we build our trails and encourage recreation. And now we are part of this more broader conversation around what we are going to do to protect all of these incredible assets that improve the quality of life in Duluth, and is actually what is bringing a lot of people here. When the Duluth Traverse was initially pitched to Mayor Ness, it was this idea that we would bring people to Duluth, and it would make Duluth a desirable place to live and to come and visit, and it worked. And now we have to make sure that that same thing that is bringing these people here isn't at risk because of the way that we've made Duluth more desirable. And yeah, and then the last thing you do is vote. So these local elections have a direct impact on the future of our community. The challenges we face are not unique to Duluth, but the solutions will need to meet our city's specific needs and constraints. Duluth is full of creative, intelligent problem solvers, and we need elected officials who are willing to engage with the broader community as we work through these issues. Yeah, so I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, the final thing I guess I would add is to focus on this slide that you've seen before. If you take nothing else away from this, this is worthy information to have because it's a very simplified way to think about public land in Duluth. Again, it shows the different types and the different protections all in one. And with the context now, the information that you now have, it sheds more, hopefully, light on why the Lester Park Golf Transfer got people so worked up. That realignment that Ansel was talking about, that county land that then was going to be transferred to the city to realign it with city values and plans. That was during the Larson administration, and a ton of effort went into researching all those titles, getting all that land ready to transfer, and it was at the 1 yard line. And we ran out of time with the Larson administration. We had a new administration come in, and it sat there at the 1 yard line and sat there. And when did it show up? It showed up tied to this transfer of a piece of the highest level of protection. The golf course required a supermajority of 8 of 9 counselors. That's the highest level of protection we're talking about, and yet it still happened. And tied to that was this last little bit of movement on that land transfer, and it can't help be looked at other than as a quid pro quo to get people who understand public land, like hopefully most of you do now, to maybe say, well, we're getting this and we're losing that, so it's kind of a wash. We're getting 1,500 acres, and we're getting rid of, what is it, 260 out at Lester Park. And so hopefully that will help grease the sleds, to make this transfer happen. Well, just the opposite happened. People couldn't help but see it. So this kind of stuff that's not happening according to the way the city has operated for a number of years now is what's got people worried, and rightly so. So they're speaking up about it. And yeah, the biggest thing is to let your representatives, your city council, your mayor know that this matters to you, this idea of public land, that you have an understanding of this and that you want to see this preserved, and it's something that you will base part of your vote on. Yeah, any questions that we can answer? We always tell people we've literally told you everything we know about public land now. We had to go from 0 to this within just a month and a half, but that's not exactly true. So if you have any questions or comments, or you want to talk from a different perspective about something, go ahead. Nobody ever wants to go first. Or yeah. Yep. So did everybody hear what she was saying there? Anyone need that repeated? So where are we in that process? Well, a big part of that, was this study that they were supposed to do, this survey that they put out. And I don't know if you saw this or not, but the results of the survey came back, and it was just a massive amount of Duluthians who participated in the survey said, we want Lester Park left wild. We do not want this developed, especially with another golf course, which is kind of the proposal for the housing there, as it would include a golf course. So it'll be very interesting to see how that gets spun, because they said, we'll let Duluth talk, and Duluth overwhelmingly talked. I mean, it was like 10-1 or something. It was unbelievable how many, the percentage. So we'll see. That will be part of that, is to see what that survey, what they're going to do with the results of that. Do you have any more information on that process?
Yeah, I think the other important part of that was that DETA already had 37.5 acres of the golf course, or former golf course, and from what I can tell, that's almost the entirety of what you can actually develop there. So the fact that we went through this whole process of transferring it to DETA and then doing this land study, which could have happened in the opposite order, but it didn't really make a whole lot of sense with what we already knew about that property, is that it actually isn't a very good spot for a huge new neighborhood or large-scale development, for a lot of different reasons. The biggest one is that most of it has bedrock either at or just below the surface. And so any utilities or anything which would all have to be built new would also have to be buried. You'd have to bring in, 6 to 10 feet of fill. So it'll be really interesting to see what they pull out of the public comment, and if they have found more land in there that could possibly be developed. But it was kind of a silly process from the start.
And it does require another vote. There will be another vote of the city council at the end of this process to affirm that sale or make that transfer a done deal. But that vote is only a majority. It's not the supermajority. The hurdle for the mayor and for those who were sort of in favor of this was to get 8 out of 9 councilors to vote, to start this process, which they did. That's politics. And yeah. Yep, that's the final vote. But do go to that open house next week if this is something that matters to you. Make your voice heard. Ask questions now that you know what you know, and tell your elected officials who will be there that this matters to you. This is an important issue to you, and that you want to see it progress the way things are meant to progress. You know, if the city is going to move forward with projects like this, which again, nothing wrong with development, but yeah, it needs to be done in a way that the community is with it, or at least is informed.
And it also needs to be done in a way that benefits the entire community. I think a big concern with a development that could go in an area like that is that the price point would be so high that people who already live here wouldn't be able to afford those homes. And what we've heard around housing is that they need to build housing at every level so that we can start to have people move from their less expensive homes into these higher priced homes. But if the gap between where people are at currently and where the price of these new homes is coming in is so wide, you won't actually have people vacating any of their existing homes, but you'll have people moving in from out of the city who already have a lot of money, and you'll just be getting this really high income infill rather than this vacancy chain theory that they're sort of alluding to when they talk about housing at every price point. So, yeah, and if you have any other questions about housing, I've learned way too much about that in the last couple of weeks as well.
All right, well, if that's it.